The Prime Minister will go to Lismore today and declare the flooding event in New South Wales to be a national emergency. Joining me now is the New South Wales Treasurer, Matt Kean. Thanks for your time. Did you know this declaration was coming?
We were aware that the Commonwealth Government were going to Lismore to make an announcement with the Premier today. So we welcome the Commonwealth Government declaring this an emergency. And if that means extra resources for New South Wales, then of course we welcome that, Laura.
What does this mean in practice?
What it means, hopefully, is more investment going into the Northern Rivers part of New South Wales and those flood-affected communities right across the state. More boots on the ground, more support, and we welcome that. This is obviously unprecedented. These are catastrophic floods. They've devastated entire communities, and we want to focus on making sure we do everything possible to get people back on their feet.
There seems to be a bit of a gap between the roles of the SES, Resilience New South Wales, ADF. So who is responsible for the slow response?
Look, we're all responsible. We need to make sure that we are getting people back on their feet, getting businesses back open and supporting people getting back into their homes. But what we do know is that the weather conditions that we saw earlier this week were unprecedented. We couldn't get helicopters into the air. We couldn't get emergency services personnel into these affected areas. Now, we'll obviously review what's happened to make sure that we improve things going forward. But let's not forget, these were unprecedented weather events. It was very difficult for our emergency service personnel to get into these affected areas. But I can say the government is obviously focused on doing everything we can to support people at this very difficult time, to clean up the aftermath and to help people get back on their feet.
Well, Resilience New South Wales says, Shane Fitzsimmons says, essentially the role of that agency is to help with the recovery and the clean-up. But is there a difference between recovery and clean-up? And Mount Lanyon's being brought in and he didn't know about it.
Well, what we're focused on is making sure that we're deploying all the machinery of government to support these people and these communities at this very difficult time. I mean, I know floods aren't an unusual event up in Lismore. They do occur, but the flood that we've just seen is of a magnitude that certainly hasn't been seen for a generation. We need to be using all our resources, financial or otherwise, to help support communities impacted by these freak weather events at this very difficult time.
I see you have flagged that potentially the state government could buy houses or help in buying back homes that are in these flood zones. But as we know, many of these homes in Lismore and the surrounds weren't actually in the flood zone. By doing that, don't you risk kind of making these communities ghost towns and ripping apart that community spirit?
Well, that's certainly not something that we want to see, but we obviously need to be looking at options to keep people safe with more frequent and extreme weather events occurring. That's one of the challenges that we face as a government. This is impacting not just communities up on the north coast. We're seeing communities in the Hawkesbury Nepean, on Sydney's outskirts being impacted by our changing weather patterns as well. Government needs to be investing to keep them safe and looking at all options. And that's just one of a suite of measures that we're considering to change the way we live and evolve in this new environment.
So what's the end goal of all that, though? Is this to move communities away from these river systems?
No, the end goal is to keep people safe, to keep communities resilient, sustainable. Obviously, there are some changes to, our weather systems that are impacting on communities more frequently and in more extreme ways. We need to consider that, we need to plan for that, and we need to have our policies in place that will support those communities to be able to live in that environment. We've got a suite of things that we're looking at, but we'll continue to review the impact of these floods on those communities that have been impacted and respond to them accordingly, Laura.
You called this extreme weather systems, but do you see what we're seeing this week as the impact of climate change?
Well, of course, I mean, this is not something happening in the distant future. It's happening right before our eyes, and it's exactly what the scientists have told us would happen for decades. Now, the New South Wales government is obviously taking steps to deal with the issue of climate change, but right now, that's not the focus. The focus is helping people get back on their feet, helping clean up these places, get people back in their homes and supporting families and businesses at this very difficult time. That's the number one focus, but we can't deny the other factors at play, and that's why this government is putting policies in place to deal with it.
You've announced that there will be grants for businesses and individuals. When will that money be out the door?
Well, today applications are open for small business grants of up to $50,000 and primary producer grants of up to $75,000. Those grants are available for small businesses, not-for-profits and agricultural primary producers to be able to support them get through this period and get back on their feet. So those funds can be used for things like repairs, restocking, maintenance, cleaning, a whole range of things. Those grants, as I said, applications are open today and through Service New South Wales, we hope on average customers will receive that cash in their banks in 5 to 10 working days. So I'd encourage any small businesses impacted by these floods, any primary producers impacted by these weather events to jump onto the Service New South Wales website, or if they don't have internet access at this time, they can ring the hotline 13 77 88, where they can speak to someone that will support them making an application and hopefully getting that money into their bank accounts to support them at this very difficult time.
Okay, Treasurer, thank you. Talk soon.
Thanks, Laura.